In the city of San Diego, California, in 1983, little Daniel Foster, then just 7 years old, lived a simple and happy life with his mother, Elaine Foster. Elaine was a young single mother, determined to give her son the best life possible, despite facing financial difficulties and a lack of family support. She worked long hours as a waitress at a local restaurant, but she always made time to play and tell stories to Daniel. For him, his mother was everything. His protector, his inspiration, and his safe haven. Despite facing many difficulties, there was an unbreakable bond between the two. But everything changed one fateful November afternoon. Elaine had been called into work to cover an extra shift, and with few options, asked a trusted neighbor to watch Daniel for a few hours. When he returned, at dusk, he found the house empty and his son missing. The police were called immediately, but clues were few. The neighbor claimed that Daniel had gone out to play in the yard and suddenly disappeared without a trace. Elaine was devastated, and an extensive investigation was launched. For months, she didn't rest, participating in searches and campaigns to find her son. Daniel's disappearance was attributed to a possible kidnapping, and the story gained local attention. However, over time, the leads went cold, and authorities lost focus on the case. Elaine, however, never gave up. She distributed posters, knocked on doors, and even saved every penny to hire private investigators. Each year that passed without hearing from Daniel was a painful blow, but she refused to give up hope. For her love for her son was greater than any obstacle, and her faith in a reunion kept her going. Meanwhile, Daniel, who had been taken by an unknown couple, ended up being taken to another city, in a distant state. He didn't fully understand what had happened, but he knew something was wrong. His new guardians claimed to be his new family, but he couldn't forget his mother's face or the life he had left behind. Little by little, Daniel adapted to the new reality, but he carried Elaine's absence in his heart. He grew up with questions that were never answered, but he kept alive the memory of the woman who taught him about love and kindness. As the years passed, life went on for both of them. Elaine moved to Phoenix, Arizona, where she found work as a nurse. She continued to carry the pain of not knowing what had happened to Daniel, but she used her experience to help other families in difficult times. Meanwhile, Daniel, who now went by his guardian's surname, grew up in a strict environment where his past was rarely talked about. He became a resilient and hard-working man, but he felt something was missing in his life. There was a void he could never fill. At age 30, Daniel began to investigate his past. He knew he didn't have enough information, but he felt something inside him driving him to seek answers. He used the few resources available, such as adoption records and old files, to try to reconstruct the events of his childhood. Each discovery, no matter how small, brought him closer to the truth. He knew finding his mother wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he couldn't give up. With each step, he felt that he was closer to filling the emptiness that had accompanied him for so long. While Daniel began his search, Elaine faced challenges of her own. Now 50, she was dealing with health problems and the uncertainty of a future without answers about her son's fate. But even in the most difficult moments, she kept hope alive that one day he would find her. There were nights when I dreamed of Daniel's face and woke up with the feeling that he was close. It was as if the bond between mother and son, despite distance and time, remained strong and intact, guiding them towards a reunion that they both desperately wanted. Life, however, seemed to test their resolve. Daniel faced financial difficulties to continue his search, while Elaine, limited by her health, struggled to remain strong. Even so, neither of them gave up. They felt, deep in their hearts, that destiny would bring them together again. And, although they didn't know it, they were closer than they imagined. Small miracles were about to happen, and a series of coincidences would begin to pave the way that would lead them to the reunion they both dreamed of. Daniel's search took a significant leap forward when, while combing through old records at a public library, he came across a newspaper article dated 1983 about the disappearance of a boy named Daniel Foster in San Diego. The information was limited, but the boy's name and photo confirmed what he already suspected. He was that boy. The article mentioned the mother, Elaine's, tireless effort to find her son, which touched Daniel deeply. She never gave up on me, he thought, feeling a wave of emotions. This moment marked the beginning of a new phase in his search. With Elaine's name as his main clue, Daniel began searching for records of people with the same name. He used public databases, social networks, and even hired a private detective. The weeks turned into months, but he couldn't find any concrete information. There were many women named Elaine Foster, and the trails often led to dead ends. Still, he continued, driven by the desire to find the woman who had given him so much love in the first years of his life. "I can't stop now," he repeated to himself whenever he faced a new difficulty. Meanwhile, in Phoenix, Elaine lived her routine without knowing that Daniel was getting closer. She had kept all the newspaper articles, photographs, and documents relating to his disappearance in a box she kept under her bed. That was his way of keeping hope alive. One day, while reviewing documents for the umpteenth time, Elaine decided to try something new, posting on social media about Daniel's disappearance. She had avoided the internet for years, fearing false hope, but now she felt she needed to try. He created an emotional publication, attaching old photos and telling his story. Elaine's post went viral in a matter of days, being shared by thousands of people across the country. Among the many supportive comments were messages from people offering help to find Daniel. Although she knew the internet could also attract scammers, she decided to remain hopeful. Each notification on her cell phone made her hold her breath, hoping that one of them would be the connection she was looking for. But as he waited, a specific message caught his attention. A man who claimed to have information about a possible location where Daniel could be. This man was Daniel himself, who had found Elaine's post after it was shared by an acquaintance. When he read the story and saw the photos, he had no doubt. That was his mother. He spent hours thinking about how to respond, fearing she wouldn't believe him. Finally, he gathered courage and wrote a short but emotionally charged message. "I'm Daniel. I think I'm your son. We can talk?" Elaine received the message in the middle of the night and, upon reading it, her heart began to race. His hands shook as he reread the words over and over, trying to believe it was real. After confirming details that only they could know, Elaine and Daniel decided to schedule a phone call. The moment was intense, full of tears and words of love that had been saved for years. Elaine could barely speak, but she managed to say the words she had dreamed of repeating for decades. "I never stopped looking for you," Daniel, in turn, confessed. "I always knew you were there somewhere, waiting for me." That call marked the beginning of a reconnection that they both knew would change their lives forever. The news of the imminent reunion filled Elaine's heart with joy, but it also brought anxiety. She knew that time had changed them both, and she feared that Daniel might harbor hurt feelings or resentment for the life that had been taken from him. On the other hand, Daniel also felt fears. He wondered if he would be able to fully reconnect with Elaine after so long. But there was something that united them, the love that had never been forgotten. With the call over, they arranged to meet for the following weekend at a small cafe in Phoenix. It was time to finally look each other in the eye and rebuild the bonds that were never truly broken. The day of the meeting finally arrived. At the small cafe in downtown Phoenix, Elaine arrived earlier than scheduled, unable to control her anxiety. He chose a table near the window, overlooking the street, and watched the passers-by while trying to hold back the tears. She was wearing a simple blue dress, the same one she had worn on one of Daniel's birthdays when he was little. She believed he might remember. On the table was an old photo of the boy that she had carried like a talisman since his disappearance. The minutes felt like hours as she waited. Meanwhile, Daniel was in a rental car a few blocks from the cafe. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions he felt. He never imagined that day would come, and now that it was so close, he was afraid he wouldn't know what to say. He looked in the rearview mirror, adjusted the collar of his shirt, and murmured, "You can do it. It's your mother." With one last deep breath, he got out of the car and started walking to the cafe. Each step seemed heavy, but at the same time, there was something in it that pulled him forward, a strength that guided him towards reunion. When Daniel entered the cafe, he saw her immediately. Elaine was sitting facing the door, and their eyes met as he walked through the doorway. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Elaine slowly stood up, her shaking hands covering her mouth as tears ran down her face. "Daniel," she murmured, as if saying his name out loud made the moment more real. He walked over to her, and before any words were spoken, the two hugged each other tightly. It was a hug full of longing, pain, and, above all, love. It was as if every second lost over the years was made up for in that moment. The silence between them was as meaningful as any words. They both cried, holding each other as if they feared losing themselves again. Daniel finally managed to mutter, "I missed you," Elaine replied, with a choked voice. "I never stopped looking for you. Never." The other customers in the cafe watched silently, understanding that something extraordinary was happening. The cafe owner, who had followed the story through Elaine's social media post, brought 2 coffees to the table, but left them alone, respecting the intimacy of that moment. After the first impact, the two started talking. Daniel told how he had grown up in another state, under the name Daniel Harris, given by his guardians. He explained that he always felt something was wrong, even though the family who raised him tried to convince him otherwise. "I never forgot you," he said. "I had flashes of your face, your voice, the stories you told." Elaine listened to each word carefully, her heart sinking knowing that he had lived for so long without the answers he deserved. "I blamed myself for years," she confessed. "I thought I could have done more to stop you from being taken." Daniel held her hand, shaking his head. "It wasn't your fault," he said firmly. "What matters is that we are here now." The tone of his voice was full of determination, as if he wanted to ensure that she no longer carried that weight. Elaine smiled through tears, feeling relieved to hear that from her son. The conversation continued, with the two exchanging stories of the decades they spent apart. Daniel spoke about his search, while Elaine spoke about her struggle to move forward, keeping alive the hope that he was somewhere, waiting to be found. As the afternoon began to fall, the cafe became quieter. The owner, who was discreetly following everything, approached to offer something special. He brought a piece of cake, saying, "It's on the house." To celebrate this moment, Daniel and Elaine laughed, thanking him. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot to both of them. It was a symbol that, despite all the pain and struggle, there was something beautiful and hopeful about this reunion. They knew this was just the beginning of a new journey, but they were ready to face it together. In the days following their meeting at the cafe, Daniel and Elaine began to rebuild the bonds that had been broken. For Elaine, every conversation with Daniel was a blessing. She wanted to know everything about him. What his school days were like, his friends, his dreams, and even his difficult times. "I want to know the man you have become," she said with a warm smile. Daniel, in turn, felt more comfortable every day, realizing that the connection with his mother was far from lost. It was as if time and distance hadn't destroyed the bond that united them. One of the first steps was to show Daniel the box of memories that Elaine kept. In it were photos, drawings, and little notes he had written as a child. "That was all I had of you," said Elaine, holding up a drawing Daniel had made of a sun and a house. He smiled, vaguely remembering that moment. "I remember that," he said. "You always said the sun shined brighter when I was around." The shared memories brought tears to both their eyes, but also served as a reminder that the love between them had never faded. As they explored the past, they also began to create new memories. Daniel invited Elaine to see his home and his routine. He introduced her to friends and even co-workers, who were moved by their story. "That's my mother," he said with pride in his voice. Elaine, in turn, felt rediscovered, as if she had gained a new chance to be the mother she always wanted to be for him. Every moment together was a step toward healing, for both her and Daniel. Little by little, Daniel began to confide in Elaine about the challenges he had faced growing up. He explained that the guardians who raised him were strict and controlling, and that he had rarely felt truly loved. "I felt like I was always out of place," he said. "But deep down, something told me I had a family waiting for me." Elaine listened carefully, her heart sinking knowing that he had suffered so much. But instead of wallowing in guilt, she decided to focus on the present. "You found your way back," "And that's what matters," she said, her tone firm and loving. The twins also began to explore memories of important places in Daniel's past. Elaine took him to the house where they lived when he was a child, which was now occupied by another family. They stayed in the backyard for a moment, where Daniel remembered how he used to play with the toys she made by hand. "I remember the stories you told," he said, "about the brave lion who never gave up no matter what." Elaine laughed, touched that he remembered something so special. "That lion was you," she replied. "I just wanted you to know that you were always stronger than you knew." Over time, Daniel began to regain parts of himself that he thought he had lost. He realized that the search for Elaine was not just about finding his mother, but also about finding his own identity. Elaine helped him fill in the gaps, sharing stories about his childhood and the family he never knew. "You come from a long line of strong people," she said, "and that's in you too." Daniel absorbed every word, feeling more whole every day. As they rebuilt their relationship, they both realized they also had to deal with past wounds. Elaine began looking for support groups to share her experience and find ways to deal with the trauma of the breakup. Daniel also began therapy, where he explored feelings of abandonment and the struggle to reconnect with his story. Despite the difficulties, both were committed to moving forward together, knowing that the journey of healing would be long, but possible. In a symbolic gesture, Elaine and Daniel decided to plant a tree in her backyard. "A tree to mark a new beginning," said Daniel, as they dug the hole together. Elaine chose a magnolia, known for its beautiful hardy flowers. "Just like us," she said, smiling at her son. When they finished, they both sat under the shade of the newly planted tree, sharing a moment of peace and gratitude. They knew there was still a lot to be done, but for the first time in decades they felt whole again. As Daniel and Elaine continued to rebuild their bonds, memories of the past began to emerge more intensely for both him and her. During a dinner at Elaine's house, Daniel finally decided to share something he had been keeping since the reunion. "I remember more about that day, Mom. About the day I was taken." Elaine stopped what she was doing, her breathing pausing for a moment. Daniel's look was serious, but carried a mixture of pain and determination. He knew he needed to tell everything to finally move on. Daniel reported that, on the afternoon he disappeared, he had gone out to play in the backyard, as he usually did. He remembered seeing an unknown woman talking to her neighbor, who seemed nervous. "They looked at me strangely, as if they were deciding something," he explained. Shortly after, the woman called him with a friendly smile, offering a sweet. Daniel, innocent and confident, approached, but soon realized something was wrong. She took him by the arm and led him to a car parked on the street. "I screamed, but no one heard," he said, as Elaine squeezed his hands, trying to hold back her tears. Elaine, moved, was silent for a moment before asking, "Do you remember who the woman was?" Daniel shook his head no. He could only remember the face of his neighbor, who watched everything without interfering. "She didn't do anything to stop me," he said, with a tone of hurt that Elaine felt deeply. The neighbor had been one of the first people he trusted to take care of Daniel, and knowing that she could have facilitated his kidnapping was like reliving the nightmare. "I always suspected her," Elaine confessed, "but I never managed to prove anything." Determined to confront the past, Daniel and Elaine began to investigate together what happened back then. Elaine remembered details of the police investigation and the clues that had emerged but never led anywhere. "There were so many closed doors," she said, frustrated. "It seemed like no one was willing to pursue the case." Daniel suggested reviewing old police records, hoping to find something that might be useful now. "If we are going to move forward, we need to understand everything that happened," he said, determined. Elaine knew this wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face anything alongside her son. With the help of a friend of Daniel's, who worked as an investigative journalist, they gained access to old files. Among the documents, they found conflicting statements from the neighbor, including one who mentioned seeing a suspicious car on the street, but without providing many details. "It's strange," said the friend, examining the statement. "It seems she knew more than she told." This discovery reignited Elaine's anger, and she was now even more certain that her neighbor had played a role in Daniel's disappearance. "I need to know the truth," she said, her eyes full of determination. While following this lead, Daniel also faced his own ghosts. He began to remember difficult times during his childhood with his guardians, especially the first few months after being taken away. "They never treated me physically badly," explained, "but there was something cold, something that made me feel like I didn't belong there." Elaine listened carefully, feeling the weight of guilt even though she knew she couldn't change the past. "You were strong, Daniel," she said. "Stronger than any child should ever need to be." His words were both comforting and admiring. Revelations about the past brought a mixture of pain and clarity. Elaine realized that she needed to forgive herself for not being able to stop the kidnapping. "I did everything I could," she said to herself, as she watched Daniel work tirelessly in search of answers. He, in turn, felt more connected to Elaine than ever. "We are in this together," he said often, making sure she didn't carry that weight alone. Their mutual support helped them face each new discovery with renewed strength. In the midst of all the pain that emerged, Daniel and Elaine found moments of comfort in each other. The process of revisiting the past brought them even closer, as if each piece of the puzzle strengthened the bond between them. They knew that no matter what they discovered, the most important thing was the love that brought them together now. "We survived all of this," Elaine said, holding Daniel's hand. "And we are here together. That's what matters." As the investigation progressed, Daniel and Elaine began to feel that they were closer to the truth. One night, while reviewing the documents, they found something that would change everything. The name of a man who had been questioned as a suspect at the time of the disappearance. He was a delivery driver in the neighborhood and had a history of petty crimes, including trespassing. Although his involvement was never proven, his name appeared repeatedly in different parts of the inquiry. "Why hasn't anyone pursued this lead?" asked Elaine, indignantly. Daniel knew the answer was probably negligence or lack of resources, but that didn't ease the frustration. They decided to follow this new lead, starting by locating the man, whose name was Walter Hines. After some searching, they discovered that he lived in a small trailer on the outskirts of Tucson, Arizona. Elaine was nervous about confronting him, but Daniel insisted it was something they needed to do. "I need to hear from him what happened," he said, determined. "If he knows something about that day, he can't keep hiding it." Elaine agreed, although she feared what they might discover. They both knew they were approaching something big, but also potentially painful. When they arrived at the scene, they found an elderly and haggard man, with a tired and suspicious look. Daniel politely introduced himself, explaining that they were investigating an old case. Walter seemed to hesitate, but invited them in. Inside the trailer, the environment was cramped and disorganized, with piles of old newspapers and a strong smell of cigarettes. Daniel got straight to the point. "Do you remember anything about the disappearance of a boy in San Diego in 1983? "I am that boy." Walter looked at him, surprised, and for a moment, seemed to consider denying any involvement. But something in his expression changed. "I knew this day would come," Walter said, his voice hoarse. He confessed that he had transported Daniel in the car that day, but claimed that he did not know it was a kidnapping. "The woman paid me to take him to an address outside the city," he said, referring to Elaine's neighbor. "She said it was to protect the boy." Elaine felt anger rising within her, but tried to remain calm to hear the rest of the story. Walter explained that by the time he realized what was happening, it was too late. He did not know where Daniel had been taken after that, but he recognized that he had been an accomplice. "I should have said something," he admitted, looking down. Elaine could hardly believe her ears. Everything pointed to the neighbor, a woman he had trusted blindly. "She destroyed our lives," she said, as Daniel placed his hand on her shoulder, trying to calm her down. Walter gave more details about what he remembered, including the name of a woman who had organized everything. It was someone Elaine knew vaguely but had never suspected. With this new information, they knew they had enough to take the case to the authorities, but there was still a lot to process emotionally. The journey back was silent. Elaine was absorbed in her thoughts, while Daniel tried to understand how he felt about Walter's confession. "He had the chance to stop this and he did nothing," Daniel said, breaking the silence. "But now we know the truth." Elaine agreed, although she felt that the pain of everything they lost could never be completely healed. "I just want justice," she said, looking out the window. Daniel nodded, but he also knew that the most important thing was to move forward together. With the new information, they contacted their journalist friend, who helped them present the case to local authorities. A new investigation was opened, and for the first time in decades, Elaine felt like something was being done. Although she knew there was still a long way to go, she found solace in the fact that she now had Daniel by her side. "We will get through this together," she said, as the two prepared for their next steps. For Daniel, facing the past was painful, but also liberating. He knew that with his mother by his side, he was finally finding peace. In the days following Walter Hines' confession, Elaine and Daniel dedicated themselves to working with authorities and ensuring that the new investigation would bring definitive answers. Information provided by Walter and old records helped police reconstruct part of the story. The neighbor who had taken care of Daniel on the fateful afternoon in 1983 was now the main suspect of having facilitated the kidnapping. Although she was already of advanced age and living in a nursing home, she could still be questioned. Elaine knew the confrontation would be difficult, but she felt she needed to hear directly from the woman the reason for her betrayal. Before going to the nursing home, Elaine and Daniel gathered strength in each other. "Are you ready for this?" Daniel asked, worried about his mother. Elaine took a deep breath, holding his hand. "Whatever it is, I need to know. I can't carry these doubts any longer." For Daniel, it was also a crucial moment. He wanted to look into the eyes of the woman who had caused so much suffering, but he also feared what she might reveal. Together, they got into the car and drove to the location, each lost in thoughts about how that moment could change their lives. When they arrived at the nursing home, they were taken to a small room where the former neighbor, now in her 80s, was sitting in a wheelchair. His dull eyes reflected surprise and, perhaps, guilt when he saw Elaine and Daniel enter. "You came," she said, her voice weak but full of tension. Elaine sat in front of the woman, facing her directly. "I want to know why," he said bluntly. The woman looked away, looking uncomfortable. "I had no choice," she replied, hesitating. "They pressured me. They threatened me." Elaine couldn't contain her frustration. "You had a choice. You could have warned me. I could have called the police. But you chose to betray my trust and take my son," he said, his voice firm but choked with emotion. The woman began to cry, finally admitting that she had been bribed by people linked to the scheme. "They said if I didn't cooperate, they would harm me and my family. I was scared," confessed. Daniel, who until then had remained silent, finally spoke. "And what happened to me? Did you know what they would do after they took me?" The woman shook her head. "No. I didn't know. I swear. I just followed their orders." Despite the confession, Elaine felt that the woman's regret did not lessen the impact of her actions. The pain of having lost precious years with Daniel was still hard to bear. "Didn't you think about what you were doing to me? What were you doing with an innocent child?" Elaine asked, tears streaming down her face. The woman tried to justify herself, but her words seemed empty. "Nothing I say will fix what I did. I know that," she said. Daniel observed the scene with a mix of anger and sadness, realizing that, although they had some answers, the feeling of injustice still weighed heavily. After the meeting, Elaine and Daniel left the nursing home in silence. The way back home was filled with tension, but also with a strange sense of relief. "Now we know the truth," Elaine said, finally breaking the silence. Daniel nodded, but added, "We still have to make sure these people are held accountable. It's not enough to know. We need justice." Elaine agreed, feeling stronger as she realized that, despite everything, her son was by her side, facing each step with courage. As the investigation continued, Elaine and Daniel grew even closer. Mutual support helped them deal with the wave of emotions that came to the surface. In quieter moments, they talked about the future and how they intended to rebuild their lives. "I want you to know every part of my story," Daniel said, smiling at his mother. "And I want to meet yours too." For Elaine, each conversation was a gift, proof that despite what they had lost, they still had much to share. Although the anger and pain were still present, Elaine began to realize that forgiveness was essential to her own healing. It didn't mean forgetting what happened, but releasing the weight he had been carrying for decades. With Daniel's support, she began attending support groups for families who had faced kidnappings and disappearances. There, she found people who understood her pain and who helped her transform her experience into strength. For Elaine, each session was a step toward the peace she had sought for so long. As investigations gained momentum, police began to gather enough evidence to open cases against those involved in Daniel's kidnapping. The woman who had organized the scheme was finally identified and arrested. She was a known criminal, responsible for other similar cases, and her capture represented a great relief for Elaine and Daniel. "They will finally pay for everything," said Elaine, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. Daniel, in turn, felt that although justice was being served, no sentence could give back the years he and his mother lost. The trial brought to light disturbing details about how the scheme had worked. Documents presented in court revealed that Daniel was initially taken as part of an operation to provide children to families who were unable to legally adopt. The guardians who raised Daniel, although they had not directly participated in the kidnapping, had paid a significant sum to obtain him, believing the transaction to be legitimate. Daniel, upon hearing this, was torn between anger and understanding. "They raised me, but it all started wrong," he said to Elaine. "I don't know how to feel about them." Despite the weight of the trial, Elaine and Daniel found strength in each other to face each day. Elaine attended every hearing, determined to show that she would not be silenced again. During his testimony, he spoke firmly about the pain of losing his son and the struggle to find him. His words moved the court, and even the judge recognized his resilience. "You are an incredibly strong mother," he said. For Elaine, recognition did not erase the wounds, but it was a reminder that her fight was worth it. At the end of the trial, the sentences were announced. The woman responsible for the scheme received a long prison sentence, and her accomplices, including Elaine's neighbor, were also held responsible. Although it was a moment of victory, Elaine and Daniel knew they still had a long way to go on their healing journey. "It doesn't erase what happened," Daniel said, holding his mother's hand. "But at least we know they can't do this to anyone else." Elaine agreed, feeling a sense of relief even though the weight of the past was still present. With the case closed, mother and son decided to focus on the future. Elaine, who had always been passionate about helping others, began working on a community project to support families facing similar trauma. Daniel, inspired by his mother's strength, began studying psychology, with the aim of helping people who, like him, were looking for answers and healing. "I want to make a difference, just like you did for me," he said, with a sincere smile. Elaine felt moved and proud to see how her son was turning pain into purpose. The new phase of their lives brought moments of joy and learning. Elaine and Daniel began traveling together, visiting places they had dreamed of visiting. Each trip was a way to create new memories and strengthen the bond they had rebuilt. On one of these trips, while walking through a park in Seattle, Elaine stopped and said, "You know, I always believed I would find you, right?" Daniel smiled and replied, "I know, Mom, and that's what brought me back." Although the past could never be completely forgotten, Elaine and Daniel learned to live with it. What was once a source of pain has become a story of resilience and love. They knew life would still bring challenges, but now they were ready to face them together. "No matter what happens," said Elaine at dinner with Daniel, "we are a family, and nothing can change that." Daniel smiled, feeling a peace he had never experienced before. Over time, Elaine published a book telling her story, titled Hope Never Dies. The project was both a way to close the loop and to inspire others. The book became a success, and she was invited to share her experience at several events. Daniel, always by her side, encouraged her in every step. "Your story changed my life, Mom," he said. For Elaine, knowing that her pain had turned into something so powerful was the biggest victory of all. With the case closed and justice finally served, Elaine and Daniel began a new stage in their lives. Despite the wounds of the past, the bond they had rebuilt grew stronger every day. Elaine, who now dedicated part of her time to social causes, decided to use her story as a tool for transformation. She began visiting support groups for families facing separations and trauma, sharing her experience. "If I can find my son again, you can also keep hope," she said, moving other mothers and fathers. Each time she told her story, Elaine felt like she was turning her pain into something meaningful. Daniel, in turn, dove headfirst into psychology studies, determined to pursue a new purpose in life. He wanted to help others who were facing the loss of identity and emotional emptiness that he himself had felt for so many years. During classes, he often found himself reflecting on the stories of the cases he studied. It was painful but also deeply therapeutic. "Understanding what happened to me is helping me understand who I am," he said to Elaine one night as they talked about their future plans. Elaine felt a mixture of pride and joy at seeing how her son was transforming pain into strength. As the months went by, Daniel and Elaine decided to work together on a special project. Inspired by the impact their story had on others, they created an organization called Paths of Hope, aimed at supporting victims of disappearances and their families. The organization offered everything from psychological assistance to legal help for those facing situations similar to those they had experienced. "We want to be the support we didn't have," explained Daniel during the inauguration of the project, which brought together dozens of families and supporters. Elaine, upon hearing his words, felt renewed. "You are proof that love can overcome anything," I told him, excited. The organization began to gain visibility, and Elaine and Daniel became public figures in awareness campaigns about the impact of family disappearances. Both participated in television shows, interviews, and community events, sharing not only the pain they faced, but also the resilience that kept them going. During a national television interview, Elaine was asked what had kept her strong over the years. "It was love," she replied without hesitation. "I knew that wherever he was, the love we shared would be the guide to bringing us together again." The response moved millions of people who followed the broadcast. Despite the new responsibilities, mother and son continued to find moments to enjoy each other's company. On a special holiday, they decided to take a trip to San Diego, the city where it all started. The return was full of mixed emotions, but it also represented an opportunity to end a cycle. Elaine took Daniel to places he frequented as a child, such as the park where they used to play and the restaurant where she worked. "These are memories that have never stopped being mine," she said, as they watched the sunset together on the beach. Daniel felt that, even with all the difficulties, those moments now belonged to the two of them again. During the trip, Daniel made an unexpected proposal. "Mom, why don't you come live with me?" He explained that now that they were rebuilding their lives, he wanted Elaine to be closer. Although reluctant at first because of the life she had built in Phoenix, Elaine accepted. "It's time for us to start from scratch together," she said. Moving into Daniel's house marked a new beginning for both of them. Elaine helped with the project, Paths of Hope, while Daniel continued his studies and built his career. Living together brought even more moments of complicity and joy. Even with the advances, challenges still emerged. Both Elaine and Daniel had to deal with the traumas that occasionally surfaced. Elaine sometimes had nightmares about the day she disappeared, while Daniel faced feelings of guilt for not looking for her sooner. Both sought therapeutic support, recognizing that the healing journey was ongoing. "The most important thing is that we are together now," said Elaine whenever one of them felt down. The phrase became a mantra for both of them, a reminder that, despite everything, they had found their way back to each other. Over time, Elaine and Daniel began to realize that their story was impacting lives in ways they never imagined. They received letters and messages from people who found hope thanks to their example. One specific message caught Elaine's attention. "Not only did you find your son again, but you also made me believe that anything can be overcome. Thank you for sharing your strength." For Elaine, this was more than validation. It was proof that her pain had transformed into a strength that transcended barriers and reached hearts. At the end of each day, Elaine and Daniel reflected on how much they had grown together. What began as a desperate search for answers had become a journey of transformation and purpose. "We don't just survive," said Daniel one night, as they were drinking tea on the porch. "We flourish." Elaine smiled, agreeing. "And we will continue to flourish," Together, he responded. For them, life had become more than a challenge to be faced. It was now a gift to be celebrated. As the years passed, the impact of Elaine and Daniel's work continued to grow. Paths of Hope has expanded to help thousands of families across the country. The organization offered emotional support, practical assistance, and, in some cases, even helped locate missing people. Daniel, now trained and working as a psychologist, led victim assistance initiatives, while Elaine focused on inspiring other mothers with her story. Each case solved, each smile restored was a reminder of why they had started this journey. "We are making a difference," Daniel said once, as they reviewed an impact report for the organization. The relationship between mother and son continued to blossom. They shared the joy of simple moments, like cooking together or tending to the garden they had planted in the backyard. For Daniel, these moments were more valuable than any professional achievement. "You are my home, Mom," he said during a family lunch. Elaine, moved, replied, "And you are my reason for living." The words, simple but sincere, summed up the deep love that united them. The connection they had rebuilt was a beacon that guided them through good days and difficult times. Over time, Elaine was invited to write a second book, focused on the challenges and lessons of rebuilding a relationship after so many years of separation. The title, Roots Rediscovered, it represented the journey of love and overcoming that she and Daniel had experienced. The book became a bestseller, and Elaine was invited to speak at universities, conferences, and on television programs. On one of these occasions, she invited Daniel to go on stage with her. "This is my greatest achievement," he said, introducing his son to the audience. The moment was met with emotional applause and tears. Although they were both dedicated to their work, they also found time to explore the world together. They went on international trips, visiting places that Elaine had always dreamed of visiting. On a trip to Italy, while walking through the historic streets of Rome, Daniel said, "Look where we've come. Who would have thought we would be here?" Elaine smiled, holding his arm. "I always knew we would find a way, Daniel. Always." These trips were not just leisure. They were celebrations of life and love that had overcome so many challenges. The tree they had planted in Elaine's yard before the move became a symbol of everything they had built together. Whenever they visited the old house, they made a point of watering it and watching how it grew. "She's just like us," said Elaine. "Strong, resilient, and full of life." For Daniel, that tree represented more than a metaphor. It was a physical reminder that even after years of pain, it was possible to be reborn and grow in unexpected ways. On the 10th anniversary of Paths of Hope, Elaine and Daniel organized a special event to celebrate the organization's impact. During the event, they received a surprise tribute, a mural with photos of all the families who had been helped thanks to their work. "This is your legacy," said the event organizer. Elaine and Daniel were deeply moved. "This all started because we never gave up on each other," Daniel said, looking at his mother. "And we will never give up on anyone." At the end of that day, as they watched the sunset, Elaine and Daniel reflected on the journey they had taken. What began as a search full of uncertainty had transformed into a story of love, resilience, and transformation. "We are proof that love can overcome anything," Elaine said, holding her son's hand. Daniel agreed with a smile on his face. "And that love will continue to guide us," he replied. Although the journey began with pain, it culminated in something beautiful and eternal. The knowledge that, even in the most difficult circumstances, true love always finds a way.